grandson of Hassan al-Banna, Professor Patterson has mentioned. You have answered, and I wanted to just to maybe add to that, because it's my research, so I wanted to add to this thing about Tariq Ramadan, and not only in France. We did that before. So there are people who are going and trying to answer Tariq Ramadan's presentations. First of all, it was Sarkozy, when he was the Minister of Interior, before he was president. And he used to have debates with Tariq Ramadan on television. And these debates were always in Tariq Ramadan's favor. They ended up to be in Tariq Ramadan's favor. He's a very good debater. So also, people who actually wrote about Tariq Ramadan were never scholars. Scholars who spoke badly or tried to say something about Tariq Ramadan, as you said earlier, have lost their places in the universities. The only person who did speak about Tariq Ramadan and wrote a book about him that is named Frère Tarek, Brother Tarek, was Caroline Forest. She is a journalist, and she is being persecuted right now because of what she wrote. Every person who ever wrote something about the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe is persecuted right now. We're talking about professors, we're talking about journalists, people like Jean Paul Net, who wrote a book about Jihad, and now he is walking around in a bulletproof vest, and his children are going to their schools in bulletproof cars. And Caroline Forest, as I've said already. Also people who left the Muslim Brotherhood, UOIF in France, such as Mohamed Louisi. They're being persecuted via trials. So this is a very dangerous topic to talk about.
Trials?
Trials, yes, they're being sued. They're being sued in court. And the last thing I wanted to add is that it has to do with what Charles also said before. The Muslim Brotherhood holds in France every year an annual meeting in La Bourget. It's a big hall. And it has, maybe during the presentations that will be held, I will show you pictures from that annual meeting. You will understand that the connection between the Muslim Brotherhood and their influence, Daniel, is what you've asked about. The impact of the Muslim Brotherhood, of the global Muslim Brotherhood, is very, very big. We can see people coming from all over the world to this annual meeting, like Kardawi, and people who are now banned in France. And we have seen people from Al-Qaeda on these meetings. So the connection is much bigger than we could imagine. That's what I would say.
And I'm just going to add a small point in that spirit to confirm a story about how scholars are being affected by the Muslim Brotherhood. And I'm saying this very conservatively and cautiously, and I'm speaking about facts of research that my colleagues and I did. But ISGAP was created in 2005, and in 2006 we created YISA. The board of ISGAP funded YISA. YISA was the Yale Initiative for the Interdisciplinary Study of Anti-Semitism. It was at Yale University. It was the first research center ever at a North American, South American university dealing with anti-Semitism. And I say this from research that I've subsequently done. The center was literally closed down by the Muslim Brotherhood, literally. And we were doing research, and I could even present something here maybe on the Wednesday night about it. And we're doing a research project and looking at what happened to us at Yale, but what's happening at American universities more widely. So this is an issue, and I was telling some of my colleagues the other night that I was told that if we would have stayed and struggled to keep the center open, it would have been successful, that our physical safety would have been in doubt. So it may have been a blessing that we lost the battle to keep it going, but we're here and we're carrying on, and I think there's more and more people doing research and realizing what is the Brotherhood, how they influence not only the Middle East but even North American and European politics, who's on their payroll, and what's at stake instead of in the not only in maintaining a free university that can inquire, debate, discuss, explore all sorts of subjects in the true liberal, democratic, safe space, and also promote democratic values in our society. These are very serious issues. So, in light of that, we are very honored and pleased that such an expert is in our presence. So please continue.
Yes, and I'm just in connection with that. the dangers involved in getting on the wrong side of the Brotherhood are connected to foundational anti-Semitism of the Brotherhood, and not, of course, not only the Brotherhood. The same, it's connected to, as Charles mentioned yesterday, the absence of the A word in the local reference to this symposium. So I know this requires a much longer argument than I have time to present, but I would argue that the general intolerance of criticism of the Brotherhood is tied to anti-Semitism. Let me just throw that out and leave it hanging. Osama bin Laden, this is someone familiar to, or face at least familiar to all of us. He attended the King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah and enrolled in 1976, where he met Muhammad Qutb, the brother of Sayyid Qutb. He met Abdullah Azam during his studies there for the first time. He and Abdullah Azam would later become very close in the creation of Al-Qaeda later. Some of bin Laden's statements regarding the Jews, again, this is the attitude toward the Jews is definitive for his thinking. The enmity between us and the Jews, he says, goes back far in time and is deeply rooted. There is no question that war between us is inevitable. Resurrection will not come before the Muslims fight the Jews. This is similar to the al-Bukhari hadith, oh, Abdullah, there's a Jew hiding behind me with trees and the rocks. When he invokes the resurrection, you see that this takes the Jew hatred to a metaphysical level. It's not about occupation or settlements, it's not about military power or competition, it's about raising the dead. Peace with the Jews is a disaster for Muslims. It's a spiritual disaster. It's a metaphysical disaster. It's peace with the great Satan. In some ways, Israel is the great Satan. The U.S. is the little Satan in some ways. Hatred of the Jews, says bin Laden, is part of our belief and part of our religion. You can't dismiss bin Laden as some fringe lunatic here. Oh, he doesn't, or you can't say, as I've had colleagues who say, he doesn't mean it. If it's not bin Laden's honey or some other, he doesn't, they don't really mean that. They don't really mean that. But if Jews didn't learn anything during the Holocaust, it was to believe people when they tell you they're going to kill you. So the fact that this is part of our religion, it's not a necessary evil that we fight the Jews. It's not an unhappy task we have to engage in. It's something holy and pleasing to God. You can't be in the religion if you don't hate the Jews. Hassan al-Turabi, Sudan. You don't read much about Hassan al-Turabi. He's a very important figure, especially in regard to the genocide in Sudan. Of course, Omar al-Bashir after him would be even more prominent there. Al-Turabi was the leading figure of the Muslim Brotherhood in Sudan. He was the one who established the presence of the Brotherhood in Sudan. I mentioned earlier, by 1952, the Brotherhood had more than 50 offices in Sudan. Throughout the 70s and the early 80s, when Jafar Numeri, the leader of Sudan, implemented what was called a policy of reconciliation, Al-Turabi took advantage of that to get more and more and more members of the Brotherhood into the government structure, the government offices. So by 1985, Numeri was history and Al-Turabi was, coming into power, and he changed the name of the Brotherhood to National Islamic Front. I think mainly for political reasons. I was having issues with Mubarak in Egypt, but the thinking is the same. In 1989, well, before I jump to 89, just a couple of statements from Al-Turabi. Confront your enemy economically, politically, and territorially, by all means, until God grants you victory. By any means, and by any means necessary. By all means. Acknowledging the Jewish state, he says, would be betraying Islamic conviction and incur the wrath of God. The Jewish state is the Jew among nations. If hatred of the Jew is part of the religion, then hatred of the Jewish state and the elimination, therefore, of the Jewish state is part of the religion. If you have to eliminate the Jew as the blackest devil, the Jewish state is the state of the blackest devils. It has to be eliminated. You can't negotiate peace and remain a good Muslim. The only way you can justify negotiation is to keep in mind the ultimate aim. So that as a negotiation as a means of encroachment and advancement. So this language, you can see that this discourse takes the anti-Semitism here to another realm, if not another level, even than what you see in National Socialism discourse. Al-Turabi was the great mediator among jihadist organizations. He convened several meetings in Sudan where he invited everyone from PLO to the Iranian representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Brotherhood, everyone in between. Osama bin Laden married his niece. One of bin Laden's wives was the niece of Al-Turabi. So Al-Turabi was organizing, coordinating the jihadist groups, all of which had connections with the Brotherhood. 1989, Omar al-Bashir came to power. He and al-Turabi had a mixed relationship. Al-Bashir declared himself president of Sudan in 1993. Al-Turabi underwent times of house arrest, and then the relation would get better. It was kind of a mixed relation with al-Bashir. Al-Bashir was heavily involved in the genocidal activity in South Sudan, which actually preceded him, went back farther than that, and Darfur. Those mass killings, at least in the mind of al-Bashir and as well as al-Turabi, were a kind of jihad to, toward the Islamization of Sudan, the purification of Sudan. Muslims were among those killed, but keep in mind, not all Muslims have their head on right from the standpoint of jihadists. Okay. They employed, Janjaweed, various groups in that in that action. So it's another example of what happens to humanity happens to the Jews first. That's the these elements. This is fallout. I would argue that this image is part of the fallout from the Muslim Brotherhood. February 1979, Islamic Revolution. Some of you are old enough to actually remember it. The Ayatollah Khomeini modeled his government after texts, teachings, writings of the Muslim Brotherhood in general, particularly Sayyid Qutb. Khomeini translated most of the works of Qutb into Farsi. He had been, as I mentioned earlier, he had been associated with the Brotherhood. I don't know that he ever actually became a member, but associated since the 1930s. Some Khomeini's views. Oh, this is one that he insisted on. You have to observe the principle of taqiyya, which is what? This would have implications for negotiating nuclear deals with the Iranians. Taqiyya is that you can tell any lie for the sake of advancing Islam when you're dealing with non-believers. It's for the good. It's a means to a good and just end.
But this is only Shia, right?
No. No, but he is Shia, unlike bin Laden, who is Sunni. They're both connected to the Brotherhood. He says I mentioned Khomeini invoking the Banu Qurayza Jews in the time of the Prophet. He said the Prophet annihilated them because of the harm they were causing Muslim society. It was a necessary action. It justifies his anti-Semitism, his Jew hatred, by situating it at the origin of Islam. It's from the Prophet. The principle of anti-Semitism is from the Prophet himself. It's not from economic or political contingencies and circumstances. You see, this casts the anti-Semitic outlook in a rather different mold. It says the Jews and their foreign backers are opposed to the very foundation of Islam and wish to establish Jewish domination throughout the world. It's an apocalyptic struggle. It's a struggle for the sake of humanity, for the sake of the world. It's not for hegemony in the Middle East or jockeying position for your economic welfare. That's not it. Vis-a-vis the Jews. Maybe the Americans or the Russians or whoever, the Egyptians or the Saudis. There's all sorts of shifting of power centers going on. But the Jew remains constant as the eternal enemy. Every Muslim, by now it's a broken record, right? Every Muslim has a duty to prepare himself for battle against Israel. Israel is the Jew among nations. Certainly in the eyes of Khomeini, but not just Khomeini. Who was one of the first guys to visit Khomeini in February 1979? In fact, what's called the first diplomatic visit, same month, a few days after Khomeini got there. Khomeini, as it often happens, showed up after all the dust had settled, or most of the dust had settled. Yasser Arafat, photographed here with Khomeini, saying to him, the path we have chosen is identical. The strategies are different. But the aim is the same. Now, Hezbollah. It's often said that Hezbollah arose in the early 80s with the Israeli incursion into Iraq. According to Naim Qassem, one of the deputies in Hezbollah, this isn't the case. The idea that the troubling part of this view that Hezbollah arose in the 80s when the Israelis came is that it's the Israelis' fault that Hezbollah came into existence. But anyway, one of their top figures who wrote a book on Hezbollah, on the history of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, says, no, Hezbollah has its origins from certain individuals in the early 60s. He names these two, Musa al-Sadr and Mohammed Hussein Fadlallah, as the founders of Hezbollah. And then with the coming of the revolution in 1979, Hezbollah gains official status. When there was a power vacuum in southern Lebanon, they took advantage of that moment in the early 80s. But they were already ready to go, so to say, according to Qassem. The current leader of Hezbollah is Nassan Nasrallah. Since 1972 or 1992. I'll get it. Some of Nasrallah's pronouncements. Notice that this has a Nazi tone about it. That we are engaged in an existentialist battle with Israel. Either we will prevail or they will, but one of us is going down. It's a life and death struggle. From the jihadist point of view, it's a spiritual life and death struggle. If we search if we search the entire globe for a more cowardly, low, weak, and frail individual in his spirit, mind, ideology, and religion, we will never find anyone like the Jew, and I am not saying the Israeli. Very often, like in Hamas Charter, for example, you'll see the claim that Jew, Israeli, Zionist, are all these terms are synonyms. Was it Haras who was telling us yesterday when the individuals from Israel, one Jewish, one Arab, when the Jewish guy goes to lecture, everybody walks out. How does it go? When the Arab goes, was it Haras?
No, I thought
that. Thank you. I'm sorry, you were sitting next to Haras.
Right.
When the Arab goes, they stay.
Correct.
Yes.
In the European Union, when the Israeli Arab Muslim speaks, they receive well, and when the Jewish Israeli speaks, they boycott.
Yes. Notice, they're not both Israeli. Their passports are both Israeli, but they're not both Israelis. What does this do to the term Israeli as a term of identifying a person and country of origin? Do you see how the Jewish state, the name of the citizen of the Jewish citizen of the Jewish state, gets wrapped up in this discourse of anti-Semitism? To be a citizen is to be the object of hatred and contempt, associated with the blackest devil and so if you say, to say Israeli, at least in the mouth of Nasrallah, is to say Jew, is to say Israeli, is to say someone who is morally contemptible. It's not that some Israelis are okay and some, like, you know, some Frenchmen, they're nice, some are not, some American, you know. No. There's this essentialist evil attached to the Israeli and to, therefore, the Israeli state, the Jewish state. And it's, I mean, it manifests in things like walking out or staying for the lectures. This is an extraordinary phenomenon, just in how we talk about citizens of a nation. Even when you say German, you don't necessarily mean Nazi, even from the period, right? Nazis are Nazis. What's Nasrallah? Anyone who reads the Quran cannot think of coexistence with the Jews. You can't think of it. Muslims must use any means at their disposal to kill Jews. For the Jews are satanic, they are behind all evil. All evil is Jewish. This should make some of us a little nervous. This thinking that use any means at our disposal. I'm not the only one here who's afraid, and he's not kidding. Now, Camp David, this is a moment that created an occasion for branching and splitting among members of the Brotherhood over the issue, what are we going to do about Camp David? What are we going to do with Sadat? Former member of the Brotherhood, 30s and 40s, arrested by the British as a Nazi spy in 1941, right? Sadat and Begin, the two most unlikely figures to make peace. And yet here they are, Sadat, and you can imagine what the Brotherhood is now thinking of Sadat, right? Big traitor, he has to be eliminated. But there was an argument within the ranks of the Brotherhood what to do about it. It created the offshoot is Islamic Jihad, which developed its Egyptian version and its Palestinian version in 1980. Not long after Camp David, Fatih Shikaki is the creator of Islamic Jihad. His thinking is regarding the Palestinian branch. Says it's dedicated to the destruction of the state of Israel and the extermination of the Jews. You can't stop with Israel. Again, the Jews are the contagion. Jews and Judaism, they're the cancer, the Jewish cancer that plagues humanity is embodied in the Zionist presence in Palestine. Note the medical metaphor again. Also occasioned by Camp David was the creation of Tanzim al-Jihad by Abd al-Salam Faraj. 1981, Faraj, you see his death is 82. He was implicated in the assassination of Sadat and saw that this breakaway move from the Brotherhood of Tanzim al-Jihad as a purist move. The Brotherhood itself is becoming impure because they're not prepared to kill Sadat, or at least those who are not prepared to kill Sadat are impure. Who aren't prepared for martyrdom, who aren't prepared to do what is necessary. Al-Faraj was also, made various declarations, and as a justification, we should refute those who say jihad in Islam is defensive. This would come up in the discussions among members of the Brotherhood. Well, jihad, this is where Faraj is saying, no, it's not defensive. Islam is, and say that Islam was not spread by the sword. To fight is in Islam to make supreme the word of God in this world. As Sayyid Qutb wrote, and Khomeini would repeat, everything glorious that has ever come to Islam has come through the sword. You can't have Islam without the sword. You can't have pure Islam without the sword, true Islam without the sword. Fighting in the path of Allah, jihad in the path of Allah, is the true Islam. Fighting to make supreme the word of God in this world. Now you can see again in 1981, there's the breakaways continue. This here across North Africa. Russia Ghanouchi created the Jihadist Renaissance Party with the word Renaissance. What does Renaissance mean? Rebirth, reinvigorated, purified, genuine, true, and so on. The Ennahda Party in Tunisia I think he returned to Tunisia, if I'm not mistaken, after the revolution there.
Yeah. He's a head of party from Malta.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So he's back. He's back. Was Hamas founded by, Ahmed Yassin, December 1987, which we had talked about. Then we have Al-Qaeda, 1988, with bin Laden, Abdullah Azzam, and Ayman al-Zawahiri. Zawahiri, thank you. Zawahiri. As you perhaps know, Al-Qaeda means the base, and it was the occasion for creation of Al-Qaeda was Afghanistan initially, the Soviet fighting in Afghanistan against the Muslims of Afghanistan.
He's Egyptian, by the way.
They're all, yes. Bin Laden is Saudi, but Zawahiri and Azzam are Egyptian. With doctorate degrees, by the way.
Yeah,
He's a physician,
Yeah.
right? Zawahiri. So when the fighting between the Soviets and the Muslims of Afghanistan came to an end in '89, Al-Qaeda, there was this discussion, well, what do we do next? So they wanted to carry the jihad well beyond the borders. Now, Al-Qaeda is, many have said, was more of a network than an organization. It's sort of a coordinating body from which various organizations extend, various organizations turn to them for help, funding, training. So they're not one organized body. Al-Zawahiri's teachings of peace with Israel and acceptance of its usurpation of Palestine is rejection of jihad. Now keep in mind, what does rejection of jihad mean? You've betrayed Islam. You've betrayed Allah. It's as Albana says, it's one of the sins that guarantees eternal damnation. So, if there's anyone at the table in peace negotiations with the Israelis who has any inclination toward jihadism, you can see that those negotiations aren't going to go anywhere. They can't. You might engage in the negotiations to buy time, to maneuver your position, right? But see, I mean, I don't know. Am I creating a sense of futility here? It looks futile. Doesn't it? It looks bad. I'm afraid. The once futile. The one slogan that's been well understood is the call for jihad against Israel. One thing, according to Al-Zawahiri, that all Muslims get is that you have to oppose Israel because the Jews control the West, they corrupt the West. So that the West does not know the language of ethics, morality, and legitimate rights. I mean, just think about this. You see the lens through which he gazes, Al-Zawahiri gazes upon America, saying the Americans know nothing about human rights, know nothing about, or legitimate rights, morality, or ethics. When, if you're in America, I think you can make a case that many people are very much concerned with human rights and ethics and tolerance, and it's kind of certainly a big part of the American discourse. Whether we understand it or not, you can argue. But what then would it amount to? Ethics, morality, and legitimate rights. It amounts to strict adherence to Sharia, the freedom that comes with submission to Allah, clarity concerning matters of truth, purity concerning matters of spirit, right? Which has to be established by any means necessary. Is the thing. The Arab Spring. Mohammed Morsi, elected to Parliament in 2000, arrested in 2011, came into power with the Arab Spring, supported in 2012, 2013, then arrested, accused of conspiring with Hamas in 2015. So, Morsi had a brief run. Assistant professor at Cal State Northridge.
I can't believe that. We have that because he claims that he worked for NASA before, but he can't say his name in English even, so we can't believe that. When he went to Germany, he said gas and alcohol don't mix and this stuff. He made funny, so.
Some of Morsi's pronouncements, very much Muslim Brotherhood like. We must nurse our children on hatred for Jews. The hatred must go on for God as a form of worshiping Him. Hatred is a form of worship. Killing is tantamount to prayer. This is the jihadist language here. Who was our enemy? The Zionists. Who occupies our land? The Zionists. Who hates us? The Zionists. Who destroys our lands? The Zionists. How are they destroying the lands? They're corrupting the lands. They're desecrating the lands. They're despoiling the land. Just not by anything they do, but simply by being there. By being there. It's the hatred of the Jew, whether it's jihadist anti-Semitism or Nazi anti-Semitism, does not lie in anything a Jew does or in any way that how the Jew looks. In these cases, the very presence is to be hated. It's like Primo Levi says, reminds me of a statement by Primo Levi. For us, he says, the lager was not a punishment. It's an ontological status. It's a rung on the ladder of being that they're assigned to. They're not being punished for having done anything. Right? So the Zionists destroyed the lands, not by burning down the forests or anything. You know, it's not like Sherman going through Atlanta. No, just by their presence. The Zionists are bloodsuckers who attack the Palestinians. They are the descendants of apes and pigs. Other offshoots, and I mean there are too many to even to hardly to mention, but there's some that are noteworthy. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, leader of ISIS. In 2010, he became leader of the Islamic State of Iraq. 2013, leader of ISIS, which is a breakaway from Al-Qaeda. And 2014, he declared the caliphate. The Russians claim they killed him a couple of weeks ago. And I think his death has been confirmed, if I'm not mistaken. Any news on the death of al-Baghdadi? But he, of course, like all of them, has his own pronouncements to the Jews. If you wonder, well, is ISIS interested in the Jewish state, or do they have any attitude for the Jews? Well, yeah, Palestine will not be your land or your home, he says to Israelis. It will be a graveyard for you. Allah has gathered you in Palestine so that the Muslims may kill you. Now that we have you all here, we'll kill you. To all the Jews, grandchildren of monkeys and pigs, we are coming for you from all over the world. So you see how the recruiting from all over the world adds this apocalyptic dimension, this battle for the sake of humanity, to the Jihad. Al-Nusra is another faction in Syria, a breakaway, another offshoot from Al-Qaeda. Abu Muhammad al-Julani is the head of the Al-Nusra Front. They early on they'd received funds from ISIS, but then they broke away from ISIS. He is supported by Hamza bin Laden, the son of Osama bin Laden. Some other figures that have emerged in recent years: Abu Malik al-Houthi in Yemen. The Houthis stem from a family, the al-Houthi family, largely. His comments: Zionist lobby is acting spitefully, planning a lot of schemes against our nation, rousing civil wars, creating services. Israel seeks to enslave Muslims. Israel is the enemy of Islam. By now you get the pattern, you get the chorus. In Algeria, Abdel Malik Drukdel, which is head of Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, which was formerly a Salafist group, and he was formerly head of the Salafist group called the Salafist Group for Preaching and Combat. He has, of course, his pronouncement mentioning the Christians. He asked about Christians, the Jew crusader. Why shouldn't we join our brothers while all these nations go united against the Muslims and consume their goodness that is corrupt and contaminate, destroy their morals? It's not just taking their territory or their goods or their resources. They're destroying their character and their souls. Look at the crimes that happen in Gaza and Iraq and Afghanistan, Somalia, and other places. these crimes are committed by the Jew crusader. Drupal assisted Boko Haram in 2006. He consulted with, provided training for Abu Bakr Shekau. I wish Femi were here because he could enlighten me and the rest of us further on Boko Haram. But Boko Haram doesn't stem directly from Al-Qaeda, but you got this, the one who was Al-Qaeda of the Maghreb, working with him, training him, teaching him, consulting. Ahmed Umar, leader of Al-Shabaab. In 2012, he affirmed Al-Shabaab's connections with Al-Qaeda. They identify as Salafist. There's a steady increase in the last 10 years, I mean, actually a rapid increase in the number of Salafist groups that are emerging. These are just a few. I found this schematic drawing of Al-Qaeda and movements that branch out, but you can't really read it very well. But you can see Islamic Emirates of Caucasus, Al-Qaeda in Arabian Peninsula, Al-Shabaab, the Maghreb, Al-Qaeda, Iraq, Al-Nusra, and lots of others. But this is hardly exhaustive. This is just scratching the surface of the offshoots. So this is also scratching the surface, but to kind of sum up, the Muslim, you see the extent of ties of various organizations and countries to the Muslim Brotherhood. The Sudanese Islamic National Front and the Iranian governments are modeled after principles of the Brotherhood, led by people who come from the Brotherhood or studied with the Brotherhood. And there's not enough room on a slide to do all the branches. This is kind of another, putting a face to it. Family tree, as much as one can put a face to it.
Family tree.
Just a last kind of footnote, the Brotherhood extends far beyond the Middle East. These are some of the organizations in the UK that have been identified as members of the Brotherhood. There is a document called The Project from 1982 that outlines a strategy for encroachment into and taking over and increasing influence in Europe in particular. The project is about Europe. There's a similar phenomenon in North America. The document here is known as the Explanatory Memorandum, 1991. These are some of the American organizations with ties to the Brotherhood. CARE, by the UAE, is labeled CARE, Brotherhood Lobby, or Egypt is labeled CARE, Brotherhood Lobby. So the influence goes on. Now, once again, you ask about media and academia, why doesn't somebody say something, and why don't they know anything? And we know why, if they know, why they don't say. But this, when the director of national intelligence describes the Brotherhood as a heterogeneous group, okay, heterogeneous, but largely secular, which has eschewed violence, then we have a problem. It reminds me of an old Far Side cartoon. I mentioned this to Charles the other day. I'm probably the only one old enough to know what the Far Side cartoons were. Well, there's, if you know, I mean, you can just picture it, Gary Larson drawing it. It's a dinosaur addressing a convention of dinosaurs. Right, and the caption says, "Gentlemen, I'm afraid it isn't a pretty picture. The food supply is dwindling, the climate is changing, and we have a brain the size of a walnut." So we have maybe not a brain the size of a walnut, but there's a serious problem of ignorance out there when you have the Director of National Intelligence making such a statement. It's bad. I would say if he knows better, it's even worse. But I'm willing to grant maybe he doesn't know. I mean, what we just looked at and talked about is not common knowledge, at least where I come from. Thanks. I'm done.
Okay, so thank you very much, David. So we have about half an hour for Q&A. So who would like to make a comment, question? Anybody? Okay. The other. Sorry. Okay. The other.
Thank you. Just the amount of the wealth of quotes is supporting your argument from so many different individuals. I was just wondering, these quotes, like where is it over like the radio? Is it in the mosque that is being said? Is it like in newspaper and literature? And how has that changed since like the 1920s?
Since the 20s.
Or since the beginning, how has that been?
Well, that's a good question. Most of the quotes I have are from books that these guys have written. Others are from speeches that they made. So they're books and their speeches. The books can be had. I mean, you can track them down. You can find them if you look for them. If you read Abdul al-Maududi or Hassan al-Banna, you see the same refrain that continues even now to get repeated. So the content since the 20s and the founding of the Brotherhood has not changed much. As I said earlier, some strategies from different groups change and shift. The Brotherhood itself. But the ideology remains basically the same. Certainly, and the anti-Semitism that's foundational remains there.
Does Mahmoud Abbas have an affiliation with the Brotherhood?
Indirectly. Mahmoud Abbas hooked up with Yasser Arafat in 1959 with the founding of Fatah. So I mean, through Arafat to Hussein to the Brotherhood. I mean, I don't think Abbas received any training from the Brotherhood like Arafat did. You know, of course, that Abbas wrote a doctoral dissertation called "The Other Side," which argues that the Jews were the real perpetrators of the Holocaust. You're aware of that, yeah? Which he wrote in Moscow, right, in the 70s. But no, I don't, maybe someone else knows of a connection between Abbas and the Brotherhood. It's very indirect.
I have if you allow me, also I have some comments. Really, I'm enjoying your lectures because very informative and informing. It's really to find people in the West can get better understand or try to understand what's the meaning of radical Islam and what is the strategy and ideology and the final targets is looking for. So I'm appreciative of what you what I want to add is that in spite of the bad relations between Sunni and Shiite, but in the point of Jews, Israel, they have high-level hermit. And let me give example. Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza, Hamas movement, are supported by Iran all the time. Despite Iran fighting the other Sunni political Islam movement in other places like Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. This is very weird. How are you supporting all the Muslim Brotherhood here in Hamas, in Gaza? Because there is Israel. Why Israel? Because she, politics or policy in the region wanted to get some legitimacy. How they can get legitimacy? They can get this legitimacy through the enemy to Israel. We are going to define Al-Quds, Al-Aqsa, and this stuff. Today, during we are sitting here talking in British, there is a big demonstration in Jerusalem by Hamas. They are trying to make a third intifada using the same propaganda of Al-Aqsa. Because after the last terror attack, when the two policemen Israeli was killed by a radical Muslim person related to Hamas, Israel decided to make metal detectors to protect the people. All the people, not only the Israeli policemen. And we can find this kind of metal detector everywhere, in Vatican, in Mecca, everywhere. Why they refuse to put it in Israel? That is big question. Okay? The second part is, a few days ago, Ayman al-Zawahiri declared that Osama bin Laden was a member in Muslim Brotherhood group. So, the most radical group and terrorist group we have nowadays started from Al-Qaeda until ISIS. They came from the Muslim Brotherhood ideas, Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb al-Mawdud. And Israel are common factors for all this group. Anybody want to get legitimacy in Arab and Muslim world should to be enemy to Israel. Should use Israel and Jewish people anti-Semitism as a way to get legitimacy. Thank you.
That's a very important point. Thank you.
Can I ask Rabbi a question?
Yeah.
Rabbi, I have a question for you. So maybe it's too early to say anything, but given David's lecture and sort of the major impact that the Brotherhood has had on thinking in the Middle East for generations, and now last week there was a terrorist attack on the Temple Mount, and the rhetoric for the last week has been very hot from Islamist sectors throughout the Islamic world, certainly in the Middle East. And now there's the potential for violence in Jerusalem. What's the role of Islamism in this moment, calling on Muslims to confront what's taking place in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount? Does it have the potential to really explode, or is it going to be, I think it's going to be quiet in the next few days?
It's a big question, but can I answer you clearly and briefly? Nowadays, the importance of the Palestinian issue is become in the down of the list, the bottom of the list, because we have another important issue. By the other means, the financial for this group are now become less, not like before more. The only source for finance now came from Iran, not came from Saudi Arabia and Qatar like before. Now we have a problem between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Now we have a problem between all Gulf states and Iran. So no one worried about the issue of Al-Aqsa, worried about the issue of Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza. So what is happening exactly? The Muslim radical groups inside Israel trying to revive this issue again by making violence, to use the same propaganda against Israel and Jews. But from my point of view, everything will pass easily, and no one will care for them because there is other important issue more than this issue. Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment or question?
You might go back to the slides with the branches.
With
It had Muslim Brotherhood on the bottom, and the
Okay,
names of the
I got the
organization.
middle.
Didn't move fast enough. Yeah, right before this one. Thank you. That's the one. Thanks.
Yeah, it's good.
She wants to see the one with
the
the
UK groups, you understand that none of this is exhaustive.
Yeah.
We distribute.
Actually, slides across the front.
Yeah,
Yeah, Ira will send them around
yeah.
in his free time.
Yeah, no. Probably put together a combination of PowerPoints to give you all.
Yeah, I'm happy to send anyone the PowerPoint. If you-
Send it to Ira.
Like, I think I have it now.
You have it now?
Yeah, I think I have it now on the computer, so I'll be able to move it from there.
Let me know if you.
Okay.
Okay, David.
So, I don't get political about it, but how could, you look at the statements that you put down by Muslim Brothers, what was President Obama thinking when he decided to, adopt them?
What was he thinking?
How do you form
I
that?
don't know what he was thinking, but my guess is he's thinking if we extend a welcoming hand, then the dynamic will change. They will respond in kind, and there might be hope for some through diplomatic means and discussion and dialogue to improve the situation, defuse a lot of tension. But it didn't. In my opinion, that won't work. I don't think it's going to work. It hasn't so far.
Could you speak for a few moments about funding for the Muslim Brotherhood today? How much of it's coming from Iran versus from the West, from Europe, other parts of the world?
I mean, I can't speak with authority about it. From what I read, there's a lot of money, huge sums of money changing hands and going in lots of directions. The Saudis continue to spend a lot of money. Certainly the Iranians, any of the oil-producing countries in the region who have money support it. Qatar. There's massive fundraising locally in Europe, UK, North America as well. As the Muslim communities grow in those regions, the funding grows. But it's very, I know it's a very vague and general answer, but there's, everyone can always use more money, but they have a lot of money coming in, and there's a lot of money flowing. It's, who was I talking to? Maybe it was Haraz. I keep going to. It's big business. There's a lot of money at stake in it. So it's, as usual, it's complicated. It's not just the ideology. There's money involved, which is often the case. Yeah.
And if I can just add, we're doing a research project on the funding of Western universities and media by the Brotherhood and Islamist funding. And it's very complicated, it's astounding. We're just scratching the surface, but you can look at universities receiving heavy funding in Europe and North America. CNN, Fareed Zakaria, his show was always funded by the Qatari Foundation, which is the Muslim Brotherhood out of Qatar. Izzy, who's not here, is a story where literally all the Jewish CNN workers based in Jerusalem were fired at a certain point about 7 years ago because of the funding and the soft. If you watch CNN International, they have all these sort of soft advertisements from Gulf states.
Wow.
That's when all the Jews were fired from CNN. There's a lot of issues.
You have no idea.
Yeah. Izzy, you talked to Izzy about it.
Who is going out this new?
Pardon me?
Who is coming out this new?
Or ISGAP.
Is that?
Yeah. The small project.
On your project?
Yep. Yeah.
So I want to say something that's going to, I could say it for this afternoon, but I'm going to say it now, which is it is very easy to create conspiracy theories. It is very easy to throw out little bits of information and make an interpretation. That is true in every long-term conflict, whether it's Ireland, whether it's South Africa. So this is a small anecdote, just give me for a moment. When I was 18, I moved to Israel. I will tell more about that later. But when I was at the university, my area of expertise was South Africa, but it ended up being South Africa because I had this picture of apartheid. Obviously I was anti-apartheid, obviously I am anti-apartheid. But what happens when you become a scholar of a topic is that you discover that what's the public knows and what goes around the table is never what's happening in the back rooms of the back rooms of the back room of politics. And that is as true of Israel and all the enemies as it is of any other conflict. So there are all kinds of conversations that take place. Otherwise, you never get to peace. And people end up swallowing their words and living with their words, and nevertheless existing one next to the other. So I say that only to point to two television programs, and this is popular culture, that have been very popular in Israel and are now popular on Netflix, except in France, where you can't get it on Netflix, only through Dailymotion. And so the most recent is called Fauda.
Fauda, yeah.
As far as I can tell, there's no translation except in English. 75% of the program is in Arabic. And the two people who made the program are not Mizrahi, they're not from families from origins in Arab countries. They learned Arabic through their military service. And the other one is Prisoners of War, which also was popular. Some people like it, some people didn't. Homeland, the U.S. American series, has something to do with it, even though it's supposed to be based on it. In both of the shows, and this is where I bring back the connection, in both of the shows, one of the themes, and I say it as an Israeli looking at Israeli television, one of the themes is to humanize and not to demonize, and to remind the Israeli public, the younger public, of the ways in which there are all sorts of connections to these hateful groups, but nevertheless, those are the people with whom peace eventually has to be made. So I come back to one last point, and that is the way President Obama is deployed and the subtext every time we talk about him. He was president of a country. We have a new president of the United States whose vocabulary is a lot smaller. Most astute, sophisticated politicians are politicians, and they work behind the scenes. President Obama did not decide to give Tariq Ramadan a visa. He appealed to the federal courts, Ramadan. And eventually, the federal court reversed the order banning him from the lower court. That is the process of democracy. We don't always get what we want. That is what democracy is all about. And Hillary Clinton then eventually had to abide by the law, and she signed the okay for him to come in on a person's visa. Now, if we reverse it, if we don't like that outcome, we end up one day being ourselves in positions of not getting visas into countries, because our views are the ones that don't happen to be the right views at that time. So I say that in this particular way because we're all scholars, and those of us who have to teach students how complex politics works, and it's definitely not what you read in the headlines. At the height of apartheid, and this is my last sentence, at the height, as a student, at the height of apartheid, when the worst murders were happening, it was every decade, literally you can map it on a map, I was reading a newspaper called Africa Confidential. Blue paper, never signed, was only circulating in certain circles. And there I buried a little article. I discovered an article that said that the Soviet Union diamond officials were meeting with the South African diamond officials on the price of diamonds. I took it to my professor who had been in the underground in South Africa and went away in the 1960s. And he looked at me and he said, "Katya, please, don't be so naive." Of course the price of diamonds was being worked on by arch enemies who claimed that they had no ties with each other. And when apartheid ended, so too did cooperation over diamonds and arms continue with new governments. So that's just to say, let's be careful when we assume that the politics that are spoken, the rhetoric that's spoken, dictates necessarily all of the agreements that go on in those back rooms, and the back rooms, and the back rooms.
it's just for the sake of the argument, I'm really sorry. You just said something very, very important. You said that the connection between the diamond, the films of the diamonds and the eyes, continued. And it was a conspiracy.
It's not a conspiracy, that's
Nobody knew
follow
that
the
they
money.
were
Well, that's not
working
true,
for
because
money.
here, this professor knew, and I worked with Naomi, because I worked at the Truman Institute for many years, where that was what I did, I read all the everything. If you read something, you become an expert in whatever it is that you're reading to a certain degree.
Unless,
But there's a lot, I mean, we don't have time even to go to this, but if one just wants to follow certain kinds of foreign policy decisions, just with the Israeli government, you end up with the rice crisis in Nigeria and a kidnapping, okay? I mean, when we can map it all out, and the only point here is, there's not a conspiracy, it's not about a conspiracy, so we need to contextualize it as part of the political world.
but look at what happens now with President Trump. The first bills he has signed had to do with his policy about who is going to accept which visas and to get into the United States. People of origin, etc., cannot now get into the United States. Why is it different from what President Obama did when he actually evoked Tariq Ramadan's visa?
Well, I think to put Obama and Trump, wait, I don't want to get.
No, no,
To
I-
put Obama's,
I'm not
to
putting
put
them in the
Obama
same
and
thing.
Trump in the same mouth, for me, that's already too
Yeah, but
much.
you're not
But
answering
in
my
either
question.
case, it went to the courts. It's in court.
It's now in court also.
It's now still in court. It still has to be signed by the Supreme Court.
And
And
if
Trump
it's not
didn't get what he
signed?
wanted.
And if it's not signed,
But Dina, there's a difference between the one individual versus stamp marking 7 people, seven countries. Whoever comes from these countries are now.
exactly. My point is not that. My point is that a president, doesn't matter which one, has a certain line that he would like, a certain policy, and then they would sign bills that would support their policies. Doesn't have to do anything with conspiracies.
Okay, I think we're confusing
I
different
think
things here.
If I may say something as well. I'll speak to both Obama and the Trump administration. The nuclear weapons deal, part of the deal was an exchange of approximately $150 billion in money that was frozen, that was unfrozen, and also deals, financial deals. Boeing, Siemens made huge deals with Iran after the P5+1 led by the United States brought Iran back into the family of nations. And now turning to Trump, Trump's imposing or implementing trade deals that started during the Obama administration in addition to new deals that have now been implemented or developed by the Trump administration that is dealing with Saudi Arabia to the tune of $350 billion, which involves arms and other related corporate deals. So it's $500 billion to 2 views that are not so nice when it comes to the other, which I find problematic. And I think going back to the Tariq Ramadan visa case, we have a situation where the administration, the State Department signed a decree allowing Tariq Ramadan to have a visa to the United States. That was one of the first actions of the administration. And I think it was coherent, because at the same time they were making direct and straight overtures to the Muslim Brotherhood, to the chagrin of the government of Egypt and other human rights activists in the region. The State Department, the Hillary Clinton State Department under Obama, played a direct role in aiding and developing before the elections in Egypt, helping the Muslim Brotherhood to train and organize for the elections. There was heavy funding from the American State Department. So we can argue whether it's good or bad or indifferent. Maybe this was a form of democracy. People really believed that this was going to have this engagement was going to be good for human rights and democracy in the Middle East. Maybe it was going to be good for the West. But these are the facts that happened. It's not conspiracy theories, these are just the facts. And I think those of us who are very concerned about engaging a movement with this ideology, not just when it came to Jews, but when it comes to women, to gay people, to other religious minorities, and democratic principles, we are very concerned. I would argue, and you may not agree with me, that's cool, that's great. I think the fact that the Middle East is imploding, that there's genocide taking place and human rights violations and refugees in the terms of many, many millions of people is a result of several administrations. It's a result of many things that are complicated and complex in their processes, but these are very, very trying times.
One last question to David, because I came in late, and not deliberately, but did you have an opportunity to speak about Ariel Sharon's role in 1987 in the establishment of Hamas as an alternative to PLA?
No, I didn't speak about that.
Okay, but that is not a little, this is not criticism, but that is not a small detail. So for those who don't follow Israel, not knowing the role that the Israeli government played in 1987, in a very critical moment, that was one of the first things about it. Little, we felt it, depending where you live. As an alternative to the PLO, that's not a small detail. That's not creating Frankenstein and no one will be able to control it. But that is a political move that miscalculated, and we can look at various outlets. So the point isn't, do I agree with it, do I disagree with it?
Created it or aided it?
The point
I
isn't,
have some information on
the
this.
point isn't to agree
No,
or
I
to
don't-
disagree,
no, I don't
it's simply to
understand.
say,
Gotcha, I don't
here
understand.
are the issues
Are
and
you-
how do they interpret
Are
it?
you arguing that there's?
Well, when I lived in Israel in 1987, we read about it, it was that Ariel Sharon created it.
Created it.
Obviously, he didn't create it, because that's not how movements get started.
So he aided, you're arguing he created it or aided it?
He certainly was instrumental in helping it move forward.
The same like
That's one
American July.
So, I was a student at a course taught by Ini Abadi. Ini Abadi was he is an expert in Islam, but he was the military commander of Gaza during that period of 1980s. And we asked him, is it true that Israel created Hamas? And he said that this is a libel, because when he was a military commander, Ahmad Yassin came to him and offered to take kids from the streets, and instead of allowing these kids staying on the streets, to create kind of social clubs to play soccer and educate them. So you may say Israel created Hamas, but you also may say that there were very pure intentions to help the population in order to avoid crimes.
Well, that just proves the point, that how we decide to spin the basic details that people easily forget, one comes to an entirely different narrative.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions to David? Going back to his presentation.
I think we're ready for,
Is it lunchtime? So enjoy lunch.